We will now move on to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
Thank you very much. Given the further revelations we have seen in the last few days, why does the First Minister still believe Rupert Murdoch is a fit person to run an international media company?
First Minister.
Well, what I've said is that is something that should be judged by the relevant authorities. Ofcom in terms of broadcasting and in terms of generally the Leveson inquiry, and that's where these matters should be judged in an independent manner. Doing what the Labour Party did yesterday on a committee of the House of Commons served only to split the committee on political lines. I don't think that was advisable. Well, it's a statement of fact. The committee was split on political lines when it was meant to be unified in terms of pursuing an inquiry. That's exactly what happened, which is why I note, incidentally, that the Labour leadership in London, unlike Joanne Lamont, when asked this very question, says these are matters which should be judged by Ofcom and the Leveson inquiry.
Joanne Lamont.
Presumably the First Minister is content to be on the same side as the Tories in their view on Rupert Murdoch. And I would also say I would have a bit more respect for the First Minister if he allowed his own backbenchers to say what they thought in our parliamentary committee. Now, the First Minister has accused me of hypocrisy in the past in raising this issue. So, indeed, lots of times I agree he has persisted in arguing that line. But let me give him a real example of hypocrisy. Let me quote: "The prospect of one person, especially Mr Murdoch, having more influence over the media in the UK would be a matter of concern, especially in Scotland." Not my words. The words of the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, when Murdoch tried to take over ITV News. She was right then. I agree with her. What made her change her mind, First Minister? It can't have been when she found out about phone hacking on an industrial scale. It couldn't have been when she found out the phone of a murdered teenager was hacked. Surely it wasn't when she found out that Joan McAlpine's phone was hacked. Or did she change her mind when the First Minister told her to, when he realised he is the last person left defending Rupert Murdoch?
First Minister.
Well, firstly,
First Minister.
Probably don't make. I mean, I condemn phone hacking, regardless of who the victim is, and regardless of who the perpetrators are. That is my position. It's been my consistent position. It will continue to be my position. I would have thought the most obvious explanation for the question that Joanne Lamont asked is there were two different subjects. The first was about ITV, where News Corp did not have a controlling stake or major interest. The second was B-Sky B, where News Corp had a 39% stake already, where most people, including Ofcom after the assurances in Sky News, said the issue would not be one of plurality. That's what they reported to the Government. As for alliances with the Conservative Party, I have to say, I think Joanne Lamont's in very weak ground. I mean, not only do we have a weekly attempt at building the grand alliance with the Conservative Party in this Parliament, of course, when it came to the budget, the Labour Party decided to vote with the Conservatives and against apprenticeships in Scotland.
Joanne Lamont.
If the First Minister was that concerned about the Millie Dowling issue, he certainly wouldn't have sought to rehabilitate him by inviting him to tea in Bute House. He wouldn't further have sought to dissemble on who was responsible on the question when he wrote an article in his First Sun on Sunday. But the reality is this: isn't the truth that the First Minister's relationship with Rupert Murdoch is preventing any real scrutiny of News International's activities in Scotland? When the phone hacking scandal broke, the First Minister claimed this was a London problem. Well, this is now well and truly on the First Minister's doorstep, and it is time we had a proper inquiry here in Scotland that investigates who else has been hacked and the full extent of the media influence over politicians and government. A former First Minister has been hacked, An aide to the current First Minister has been hacked. Has the First Minister himself been hacked? And why is he blocking a Scottish inquiry into the activities of his old friend Rupert Murdoch?
First Minister.
We can now get on to the nub of the issue, and I think it's time this chamber realised the full seriousness of what is intending to be done in Scotland. We have a live police inquiry in Scotland at the present moment. That inquiry is up to 40 officers working on it. It is a huge commitment of resource by Strathclyde Police. I know that because of what happened in terms of inaction in the past in the Metropolitan Police, that people are sceptical about police inquiries in these matters. There is no reason to be sceptical about this inquiry by Strathclyde Police. It's a live inquiry. Huge resources are being devoted to it, and the expectation is that the inquiry will pursue the evidence without fear or favour and come to effective results. That means that there are implications for what should be done elsewhere. A police inquiry has primacy. It means that any committee of this Parliament could not impinge on information to that inquiry. It means that any witness would have to be warned against incrimination. It means that anybody who was subject to adverse publicity in a parliamentary inquiry could then quote Article 6 of the European Convention and use that in a defence in a future criminal inquiry. In other words, there could be a significant risk that a criminal investigation and criminal inquiry would be compromised. It is vital that people in this chamber understand that now there is a real police inquiry taking place in Scotland. Would it had happened in 2005 when these issues were actually being carried through? Even the Leveson inquiry, which is a judicial inquiry, has to bear in mind the existence of a live police inquiry. For example, when the Chief Constable of Strathclyde went before Leveson, he could not be questioned on all aspects being concerned by the current police inquiry, which is exactly why Leveson is looking at a range of issues which go beyond the criminal investigations. And I shall be absolutely delighted next month to go to Leveson and account for my contacts with News International and News Corps over the years. I'm not certain that members of the Labour Party will have such a comfortable experience.
I don't even think the First Minister himself believed that, never mind his backbenchers. Because the fact of the matter is, this is our great, modern, new Scottish Parliament. We see a Tory Cabinet Secretary brought before the House of Commons. We see a Tory Prime Minister brought before the House of Commons. We see a parliamentary inquiry. But in the Scottish Parliament, the First Minister runs away from accountability. Things are not incompatible except in the First Minister's own head. Last year, the First Minister told us the people who live in Scotland are the best people to make decisions about their own future. Of that, there can be no doubt. Yet, he is content to rely on a judicial inquiry and a parliamentary committee being run in London to determine the truth in Scotland. I look forward to hearing the First Minister answer a question under oath. I look forward to hearing him answer a question. But there is this question now. Why does the First Minister fear a Parliament investigation here in Scotland? This started with Rupert Murdoch trying to take over B-Sky B. Turns out he owns the SNP.
First Minister.
Gets her chance every week to ask me questions. The fact that she doesn't make a good job of it is hardly my responsibility. I've already tried to explain about police inquiries and their importance. Of course, Parliament, incidentally, can do exactly what it likes, but the police inquiries take precedence in issues such as this. Can I now try to inform about Leveson? Leveson is an inquiry established under the Inquiries Act of 2005. That means the Scottish Government had to be consulted on the terms of reference to Leveson. And so did the other devolved administrations, incidentally. We tried to broaden and strengthen these terms of reference. I put that correspondence with the UK Government in Spice so that every member can see it. That's why I'll be going to Leveson in common with other political leaders next month and able to account for all of my meetings. I'll account for every single one of the 5 meetings I've had with Rupert Murdoch over the last 5 years. I'm sure that Gordon Brown will be delighted to explain the 17 meetings he had over 3 years, or David Cameron the 18 meetings over the last 5 years. That will be the responsibility of every leading politician, because Leveson, under oath, is looking at relationships between press and politicians. But, of course, Joanne Lamont asked me why I believe that the Labour Party is guilty of hypocrisy on this issue. She'll give me just 2 explanations as to why I think that's the case. Firstly, these things took place on the Labour Party's watch. You were in government in London, you were in government in Edinburgh. And secondly, the idea that the harder you complain, then people will forget about 15 years of association with News International is for the birds. People look at the Labour Party and they say humbug and hypocrisy.
Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
No plans, near future.
Ruth Davidson.
Let's simplify this a little. We know that the former First Minister, Jack McConnell, was hacked. We know that his children were hacked. We know that the current First Minister's close parliamentary aide was hacked. What Parliament and the people of Scotland deserve to be told is whether this First Minister was hacked. His spokesman has repeatedly said that his boss will reveal all to the Leveson inquiry. But this First Minister reports to this Parliament. So this is his big opportunity. Dodging the question now, only to reveal all when he takes the stand later, will look like media manipulation of the very worst kind. Was he hacked and didn't speak out to protect his new pest pal? Or did Rupert not need to bother tapping his phone because he was already on speed dial? Parliament is asking. Scotland is watching. First Minister, were you hacked?
First Minister.
As Ruth Davidson rightly says, I'll be going to the Leveson inquiry. I'll be speaking specifically about a range of matters under oath, and that's where I shall give my evidence, which is exactly the right thing to do. An inquiry which was set up by cross-party agreement on a judicial basis. But in the course of her question, Ruth Davidson referred to media manipulation of the worst kind, and the 2 words that came to my mind when she said that were Andy Coulson.
Ruth Davidson.
Well, let's talk of inquiries then, shall we? You want to speak at the Leveson inquiry. We have a First Minister who's willing to speak at an English inquiry but not hold one in Scotland. He says that police have primacy, and yet an inquiry in England. He says that police have primacy. He says that police have primacy as it is ongoing, as investigations are ongoing, and yet the departure of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee managed to hold an inquiry at Westminster. We need to look deeper in Scotland than Leveson allows when it comes to the conduct of this First Minister. So I support calls for an inquiry in this Parliament, especially when the First Minister's intervention appears to contravene a law of his own making. The Judiciary and Court Scotland Act 2008 states, in particular, the First Minister must not seek to influence particular judicial decisions through any special access to the judiciary. The UK Culture Secretary was acting in a quasi-judicial role on the issue of B-Sky B, and the First Minister has admitted that he was seeking to influence him. Indeed, there were desperate calls between his office and that of the Minister. So surely, Surely, when there are questions as to whether Surely when there are questions as to whether a First Minister of Scotland may have acted in contravention of Scots law, a parliamentary inquiry is the minimum to which we are entitled.
First Minister.
I don't think even your backbenchers believe that absolute mince of a question. I mean, for goodness sake, the First Minister of Scotland advocates jobs and investment for Scotland at every single opportunity, and that's what it should do. As far as Levison is concerned, Levison is not an English inquiry. It's set up under if I'd said it was an English inquiry, the Tory bench has been bouncing up and accusing me of racism and narrow nationalism and all that sort of thing. Surely she hasn't lost her belief in the United Kingdom. She surely knows that it's a cross-border inquiry. She surely knows and has read the input that the Scottish Government is as we try to strengthen the terms of reference to the inquiry. And I'm sure she'll be on the edge of her seat when I give evidence to Levison next month. But can I just say this about the Conservative Party? The Parliamentary Committee in Westminster, of course, had their inquiry into whether they were misled in terms of previous occasions. But the Conservative Party doesn't seem to have grasped the essential point in all of this, that when there are questions asked about the Prime Minister and referring people to independent adjudication, they have an independent adjudicator who has not once been asked to adjudicate on anything. They actually pay an independent adjudicator on the ministerial code, and he hasn't been called into action once. I've referred myself 5 times. The fact that every single one of them get kicked out the park is neither here nor there, so I think I've stood up to examination rather better than her colleagues in Westminster.
Question number 3, Willie Rennie.
Issues will be discussed at the next meeting of the Cabinet.
First Minister.
The next meeting of the Cabinet will discuss issues of importance to the people of Scotland.
Willie Rennie.
The First Minister is responsible to this Parliament. Why won't he tell us whether his phone has been hacked? Despite all the excuses, we've heard the First Minister man the barricades to protect Rupert Murdoch from a Scottish inquiry. What's happened? What has happened? A year ago, the First Minister called Levison, would have called Levison a London-based court, with a judge who has only been to Scotland for the Edinburgh Festival. Now he says it's the right place for a decision on Scotland. When did he switch from being a roaring Celtic lion to being a Celtic mouse in support of all things English, of London courts, Trafalgar Square, Morris dancing? Why can't the First Minister decide to back an inquiry in Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm sure if I'm called on to give a definition of English nationality, I'll do rather better than Willie Rennie. Just a chief. Levison was established in the Inquiries Act of 2005. It's cross-border. We inputted into the terms of reference. It was set up by all-party agreement because if we care to look back to that halcyon day, then it was when all parties decided that this was the correct route of a judicial inquiry. Even the last Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, said, when he was speaking to the House of Commons, that his deepest regret is that he hadn't set up a judicial inquiry when he was in office because the civil service told him not to. But we all subscribe to Levison as being the way to pursue these issues. Having subscribed to it, don't you think we should now abide by that? And when he reads the correspondence and the input we had into the terms of reference, our efforts to strengthen and to broaden the terms of reference, then he'll see that we should have every confidence that Chief Justice Levison will have a thorough inquiry and he'll come up with substantial recommendations. I don't see anything wrong with that. And in fact, if I'd taken a different course and said last year, no, we're not to have Levison, we must set up our own Scottish judicial inquiry, then every single one of these opposition parties would have been bouncing up and down and suggesting that we weren't prepared to rise to the moment. I rose to the moment. Maybe Willie Rennie will try to do the same.
Willie Rennie.
Doesn't really add up.
No.
absolutely everything, from the price of dog food to the Americanisation of Halloween, I can't understand why he won't stand up and be counted on this. Isn't it the case
Order, we will hear the member.
He has traded favours with Rupert Murdoch, defended him on phone hacking, stood up for him on B Sky B, now protecting him in Scotland? Isn't it true? Every time, never on the side of ordinary people, never on the side of the victims, always on the side of the rich and the powerful.
First Minister. First Minister.
I was just reflecting in terms of being on the side of ordinary people. The interview that Willie Rennie conducted with Gary Robertson last week, I'll just give the Chamber a flavour of it. He was asked, Lib Dem MP, former Sky employee, would contact Vince Cable to ask about the economic investment point of view of the takeover bids. So you're saying it was Jim Tolson? Yes, says Willie Rennie, I'm sure it was Jim Tolson. Jim Tolson used to work at Sky, and we've got significant numbers of employees at Sky and Dunfermline. Gary Robertson, so it's OK for a Lib Dem MP to lobby a potential minister in the case of Vince Cable. Why is it not OK for the First Minister to do it? The answer came, it's because the Sun weren't supporting the Liberal Democrats. I've got news for Willie Rennie. Neither is anyone else.
As usual.
Order.
Selectively quoting. The First Minister knows full well that the reason he was backing B Sky B, the reason he was putting his interests above those of phone hacking victims, is because he wanted the support of the Sun. Why can't he just admit it?
First Minister.
Because of the 6,300 jobs in Dunfermline, Livingston and Uddingston, the 2,000 jobs in Glasgow and elsewhere, which the Labour Party didn't even know about last week, because that is the priority. And maybe that's the difference that people might reflect on tomorrow, where the opposition parties have different priorities. Ours are jobs, 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 not muck, muck, muck.
Question number 4, Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask First Minister what the Scottish Government's position is on the findings of the report by the Jimmy Reid Foundation, The Silent Crisis, Failure and Revival in Local Democracy in Scotland.
First Minister.
Well, it's a valuable contribution to the debate on local democracy. The SNP administration tried a new partnership with local government over the last 5 years through the abolition of ring fencing, the focus on outcome agreements. The local government minister has led a reform of community planning partnership alongside COSLA. Will shortly consult on the Community Empowerment Bill. And most recently, the partnership approach led to that joint agreement, that hugely important joint agreement between the government and COSLA to protect over 500,000 people across Scotland from the United Kingdom Conservative Liberal cuts to their council tax benefit.
Rob Gibson.
I thank the First Minister for his answer and look forward to the details of the Community Empowerment Bill. Alongside empowering local democracy, it is essential that local government works in partnership with the government to protect the vulnerable and support the economy. Will the First Minister commit to continuing that partnership approach after tomorrow's elections and include the Jimmy Reid Foundation's thoughts in his work?
First Minister.
Yes, I will. I think a partnership and progress between councils and government is vital for Scotland's future. That will include 600 hours of free nursery education, the Opportunities for All guarantee for every 16 to 19-year-old in Scotland, and of course the vital concentration on family budgets and the knowledge that the council tax freeze will be worth £1,200 to each average family over the 8 years that we intend to implement that freeze.
William Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I declare an interest as a board member of the Scottish Left Review, the parent board of the Jimmy Reid Foundation? Is the First Minister minded to set up a commission as asked for in the report to look into democracy at the local level? And if so, will he ensure that it considers the democratic deficit of a lack of women's participation at local government level and ensure that any proposed change does not result in greater inequality between poorer and richer communities, as also cited in the report?
First Minister.
A number of these issues, of course, were touched on in the Christie report, as well as the report from the Jimmy Reid Foundation, the late Campbell Christie. I'd be very happy to meet Elaine Smith to talk about these issues in more detail, to see the areas of the report which could be prioritised and the ones that would have cross-party agreement across this chamber. So if she's willing, I'd be very happy to progress things in that way.
Question number 5, Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what information the Scottish Government was given following the abduction of Khalil Dale.
First Minister.
Well, I think obviously the whole Parliament will place on record that we utterly condemn the brutal murder of Khalil Dale, a man who devoted his life to helping others. Mr Dale was a nurse and highly experienced aid worker who had saved a huge number of lives in his long service in many areas with the International Committee of the Red Cross. He had friends across the planet. He regularly travelled back to Dumfries, where he was well known and well loved. My sincere condolences, and I know that of the whole chamber, go to family, friends, and particularly to his fiancée Anne and his brother Ian at what is a very sad time. Mr Dale was abducted on the 5th of January 2012. As the Cabinet Secretary for Justice told the chamber on the 26th of January, Alistair Butt, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State of the Foreign Office, met with the Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs on the 19th of January and informed her that the International Committee of the Red Cross was in the lead. Unfortunately, tragically, their efforts to secure the release of Mr Dale did not succeed, and the tragedy that we learned about this week ensued.
Elaine Murray.
I'd like to thank the First Minister for his reply and to associate myself with his comments about my former constituent. I do appreciate the need for discretion regarding the information made publicly available while the Red Cross was attempting to secure Mr Dale's release, and indeed the continuing need not to allow publicity to interfere with solving this brutal crime. I wonder, however, if this First Minister is able to provide any comfort to Mr Dale's family and friends regarding what actions were taken after the 26th of January, and indeed if he has any information regarding who may have been responsible for his abduction. I wonder also how we in Scotland can assist with solving this crime. For example, has any consideration been given to providing a reward for information leading to the successful prosecution of the perpetrators?
First Minister.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary spoke to Alistair Butt as recently as this morning, I think, and he confirmed that the FCO and the International Community of the Red Cross worked tirelessly with their collective resources to secure Khalil Dale's release. We have in the light of an atrocity and a tragedy, it's easy to say things could have been done differently, but we've got no reason to suppose, as the Scottish Government, that the Foreign Office didn't act as they saw it in the best interests of Khalil Dale in allowing the International Committee of the Red Cross to take the lead. That was the request from the organisation. Fiona Hislop was also assured that Mr Dale's family had been kept fully informed through the FCO as arrangements are made for recovering Mr Dale's body. A number of parts of that information are obviously confidential, but that issue was raised and is being dealt with. In terms of the responsibility, then the responsibility that was claimed was well publicised and publicly declared, with no reason to suppose that that is not an accurate assessment. And we'll look carefully at any contribution that we can make which would help the security of Scottish aid workers working internationally. This is not, as the member will be aware, the first tragedy we've had in recent months of this kind. And while, of course, the impact on family and friends is deeply felt, I think there should be admiration and respect across the whole Scottish community that we have citizens who are prepared to put their lives on the line to help others across this planet.
Question number 6, Gavin Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how many empty commercial properties the Scottish Government predicts will no longer be empty as a direct consequence of the proposals in the Local Government Finance and Unoccupied Properties Scotland Bill.
First Minister.
Well, empty properties are a blight on high streets across Scotland. Our proposed reform of empty property rates relief will introduce incentive to bring these premises back into economic use, regenerating thus our high streets. The reform is estimated to raise an additional £18 million for the Scottish budget a year over 2 years. This is a limited additional cost, if I could make a comparison to business, when compared to the £1,000 million costs of the UK Government's recent VAT rise.
Gavin Brown.
Can I thank the First Minister for the answer? Unfortunately, the answer had nothing to do with the question that I actually asked. So let me just ask it simply again. Let me simplify it for the First Minister. How many empty commercial properties will no longer be empty as a consequence of his bill?
First Minister.
As an answer, I know that Gavin Brown pays close attention to the Small Business Federation. And the Small Business Federation have consistently argued that this would be an incentive to bring properties back into active use. I hope and believe that Gavin Brown will pay more attention to the views of the Small Business Federation in future. There is an assumption within the papers in terms of the number of premises. It's 5,500. But that is an interesting contrast. And I'm sorry to answer the question. It's so disappointing, Gavin Brown, since he was chirping away quite merrily. But I think we should contrast perhaps that 5,000 figure with just looking at his own constituency here in Lothian, where of course 10,800 premises are benefiting from the small business bonus introduced, maintained and championed by this SNP government.
That ends First Minister's questions. We now